Hello and welcome to the Oak Spring podcast, where we celebrate the legacy of Mrs. Bunny Mellon through the work of the Oak Spring Garden Foundation. I'm Chris Stafford, and this is Season 2, Episode 9. Hello, our topic this month is the fall reading list, and we'll be joined by two authors on this episode. Marika Thomas, who'll be talking about her new book, Storying Plant Communications, that she's written with her co-author Melissa M. Parks. We'll also be hearing from Aleya Fraser, who is the author of Caribbean Herbalism. And we'll also be joined by the Oak Spring Programs Director, Danielle Eady, who has news of events and programs here at Oak Spring. But we begin with our first guest, who is the current sabbatical awardee here at Oak Spring, and that's Aleya Fraser, who joins us now from her home in the Caribbean. Aleya, thank you for joining me and welcome to the Oak Spring podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me, Chris.
Now, I know you were here this summer. You spent a few months with us. Were you able to have some downtime as well?
Yeah, I was there for a 3-month sabbatical award, which I think this is the first year Oak Spring has offered it, and I was the third person to have it. And it was such a beautiful time. I was able to spend a lot of time in the library. I did get some downtime. I explored a lot of nature in the area, like going to Sky Meadows State Park and the State Arboretum and Appalachian Trails. But definitely my favorite part was the library. Because interestingly enough, they had a lot of things about the Caribbean because Bunny Mellon had a house in Antigua, so she had a special interest there. And I live in Trinidad and Tobago, so I was able to see some very rich historical documents that were pertinent to my own research with plants and history in the Caribbean.
Well, you mentioned there that you're in Trinidad and Tobago now, but you're originally from Maryland. You're a local girl.
Yeah. Born and raised in Baltimore County, Maryland, and went to schools around the DMV. I was farming on the eastern shore of Maryland for about 5 years as well. So I come from a background of farming, science, and ethnobotany now.
Tell us a little bit more about that background, Aleya.
Yeah, so I live in Trinidad and Tobago, and that's because that's where my family is from. My father grew up here, and I would come back and forth here for the summers. And I think this is where I really got my spark and inspiration to work with plants because, it's the middle of a rainforest for the most part, and a lot of medicinal plants and fruits are growing everywhere. So I went through life with that in my background, but it wasn't until I graduated college. I was a teacher for a couple of years with Teach for America. And then I thought I was going to go to medical school. So I took the MCAT. I was studying. I did pretty well on it. I could have gotten into the medical schools, but at the same time, like a little bug bit me, and I started looking into farming, and I was researching farms and urban farming in Baltimore City because that's where I was living at the time. And I started, volunteering on an urban farm. And from there, the ball kept rolling. I ended up on the eastern shore of Maryland with 2 acres. I founded a farm called Black Dirt Farm, and we were doing market, CSA, community supported agriculture. We were doing a lot of educational programming as well, bringing people from Philadelphia, Baltimore City, and DC out into this rural area to, connect with nature, connect with where their food comes from. And when I stopped doing that, when I stopped farming on the Eastern Shore, that's when I set my eyes on Trinidad because, this has been my ancestry. I wanted to connect with my roots here. And, I kind of just said I wanted to move to Trinidad one day, and I started volunteering on farms here and made my way into a whole livelihood here. That's a roundabout way of how I got to Trinidad.
But what was the roots of your original interest in agriculture, in growing anything and plant life? What were the seeds of that interest?
that the seeds were definitely food is medicine. Like that saying like runs rent free in my head, they say, because wanting to be a doctor, wanting to like ever since I was 4 years old, I just always said I wanted to be a doctor. And I always think about how, when you're a young child, you think you can be a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher. You don't ever think, or at least for me, I didn't think farmer. But once it hit me that being a farmer and growing food could be a way to heal people and help people, that was definitely what really caught me. And while I'm farming and growing vegetables, sweet potatoes, tomatoes, peppers, I'm also noticing all the wild plants that are growing on the land, the trees, sassafras, dandelion, wintercress, lamb's quarter. And as I started to learn that these things were also medicinal and used to help people heal themselves, that was just the icing on the cake for me. So that led me down a path of really doing some deep dive research and connecting my undergrad degree, which is neurophysiology. So I have an eye for like reading scientific articles and medical research and, combining that with my time and experience outdoors and using these plants to work on my own body and my own family. It just really solidified that this was the path that I wanted to be on.
So herbalism then came in as a natural confluence of what you were doing.
Yeah, I would say so.
And when did you start writing about it?
I started doing deep documentation, which I feel like is the precursor to writing, around 7 years ago when I started interviewing elders in Trinidad. And I would go around with a mentor of mine who was an ethnobotanist and an herbalist. And we would try to capture this knowledge from elders, asking them about the plants that they used, how they used them, because it's a bit of a fading. The knowledge is fading. So I had a lot of transcriptions. I had a lot of interviews. I had a lot of pictures. And it wasn't until about 2 years ago that I decided to start writing those things and synthesizing them into my Substack, which I've been continually writing on monthly. And then from writing on Substack consistently, a publisher reached out and wanted me to write a book about Caribbean herbalism, traditional knowledge and modern research. So that, it just kind of all flowed from that documenting first and then like putting myself out there on the internet, and writing for the public, because it just felt like I was getting all of this knowledge and I was very grateful to get it. And I just needed to share it in a wider platform because it didn't, like I said, the knowledge is fading, but more people need to be remembering and re-remembering these things. So I wanted to get it out to the public as wide as possible.
So the writing is relatively new in terms of your career, but obviously with a teaching background, you knew how to do research and everything that a journalist required. But take us back to your childhood, though. What were your early passions as a child? Did you have aspirations to eventually write one day, or did you just want to be in touch with the earth?
I was a science nerd and geek, and I remember writing in my diary, and my mother always reminds me that, like, to be famous, I thought one day I wanted to be in a science textbook. So this was probably like 10 or 12, and I just loved textbooks, and I loved learning, and I was a visual learner and reading. So I aspired to be in a textbook. So that's kind of a start to this. I also grew up with a backyard that was a forest, and my parents were pretty, I'm just grateful that they let me have kind of free reign back there. Me and my friends would be, we were baby naturalists, I would say. We were playing in the creek. We were collecting rocks and stones. And I find that my adult life just kind of mirrors that childhood, in that I have larger forests to play with now, and more plants and larger bodies of water in my backyard now that I live in Trinidad. So I would say I've always been on this path, but it's been a roundabout journey for sure. But if I look back, it was definitely, the seeds were planted from young.
From a very early age. And did you have any mentors? Did you have anyone encouraging you down this pathway, Aleya?
Yes. My grandmother, who's still alive, she's 96 and she lives in Trinidad as well. She's been one of my biggest supporters. My family, when I decided to go from going to medical school to deciding to be a farmer, there were a lot of feelings there. But when I told my grandmother, it just made sense to her. And it started unlocking all the familial stories of her father, who was a farmer, all the things he did. And she started opening up about her healing practices and the plants that she uses. So she's definitely been a guiding light and a mentor. And another mentor, his name is Francis Morian. He's written a lot of books on Caribbean herbs and plants, and he's a botanist by trade. So I'm definitely grateful to him for teaching me how to properly identify plants and how to document by, interviewing elders. So I would say those are two of the bigger mentors that really set me on the path to write this book, especially.
What did your experiences farming on the Eastern Shore teach you? What were your biggest takeaways?
Yeah, that was a very special time because the land that I was on is in Preston, Maryland, and that was the ancestral lands of Harriet Tubman. So in the history of Harriet Tubman, you'll learn that she escaped down Marsh Creek Road and Poplar Neck Road with her family on Christmas Eve night. And this farm was right on the intersection of Poplar Neck and Marsh Creek Road. So her parents were enslaved there on the same land that I was farming on, hundreds of years later. So from there, I just took this sense of what freedom meant, because it was interesting to me that Harriet Tubman left this land for her own freedom, but I was coming back to farming and connecting with nature for another sense of freedom. And that was really one of my biggest takeaways. And the two women who owned the land were still best friends. They are in their 80s right now. And those are huge mentors for me in the farming world, not necessarily the science or the herbalism, but they just set me up for life in the terms of how to think of organically farming, stewarding land, not just farming, because they had forests on their land too. So they showed me how they manage forests, and it definitely was a huge jumpstart to where I am now today as well.
Well, let's fast forward to your first book, and congratulations.
Thank you.
Caribbean Herbalism. Rich and complex stories of Caribbean people and the plants that have sustained them. Let's begin there with the topics that you're covering in this book.
In the beginning, I kind of give an overview of the history of the Caribbean and how the different groups of people got here. So many people don't really realize how diverse it is here. Like, you have Indian from Southeast India. There's indigenous influences from the natives that were already here. There's the African influence from the enslaved people who came. And there's also a huge European influence here for people who came here and also set up and didn't leave. So I give a background on how those different groups of people came here and their contributions to Caribbean herbalism, because they all brought plants, they all brought ways of knowing and dealing with plants, and they all, all of those things are still recognized today. And then I go into a few of the most important plants to me. I think I have around 30 to 40 plants that I mention, and I go through their botanical description, because again, I think it's important for people to be able to properly identify plants. I talk about the traditional knowledge that I've gained from elders. These are things I got through interviews, things I've, not as much that I've read, but mainly things that I've actually heard and learned from people in person. And I also intersperse that with modern research, because I like to say that modern research is catching up with traditional knowledge. And a lot of the times, what our ancestors knew that these plants were good for, hundreds of years later, the scientific studies are showing the same exact thing. And so I cite these things. I'm really big on citations and giving references so people can do their own research. And then finally, about when I talk about each herb, I mention my personal accounts with them. So I don't mention any plant in this book that I don't actually grow myself or use myself, or don't, come across myself. So I'm really happy to be able to give that embodied knowledge to people, because that's kind of what's missing today, is that, like, you can go online and see this is good for this or this is good for that. But people aren't, fully building relationships with plants to get to know them. And I think that's important. And then finally, towards the end of the book, I give an overview of some of the different herbal remedies that people in the Caribbean use, such as bush teas, bush baths, tonics, herbal wines. And I interviewed a few people for the book, so I put full interviews in the back. Two of them are really important. One was an elder midwife. So I love learning about midwifery practices in particular. So I put her interview in there, and then an interview with my mother-in-law, who is also an inspiration and mentor, because she is very well versed on herbs as well and the plants. And what I like that she mentions in her interview is that, when you try to figure out why don't people use these remedies anymore, even if they know that they work and they've seen them work. And she talks about how they're just not as convenient. Like back in the day, before deforestation and urbanization, the plants were in your backyard and they were convenient. But now the pharmacy is in your backyard and that's more convenient. So a lot of my work now with land stewardship is trying to repropagate these type of plants and give them out and share them so that, they become more convenient again.
How did you choose and decide what you would cover in this book, Aleya?
I kind of worked backwards. Like I looked through all the interviews that I'd done and looked at the plants that people talk about the most, of course. I did some traveling, like I went to Guyana, I went to Barbados, which I also consider part of the Caribbean, to interview people. So the plants that come up the most in those type of interactions are the ones I mentioned. And like I also said, the plants that I've actually had personal experience with or that are growing in my yard were the ones that I really decided to talk about. A couple years ago, I did a workshop too that was called Bush Teas, Bush Baths, a Caribbean Materia Medica. And that title, just kind of always fueled me for my writing. I wanted my book to be like a bit of a Materia Medica, something you could pick up, look through. You don't have to read it front to back. If there's an herb you're curious about, you can, look it up in there. And yeah, that was a bit of my process.
So the book offers the tools really to build a relationship with the plants and make those common Caribbean herbal remedies more accessible, more usable in a practical term now. Things like bush teas, bush baths, infused alcohols and oils, and herbal wines. There is so much to this. It obviously means a lot to you. Why is it important to you to get your arms around all of these things and bring them to the public in a way that makes it practical and accessible for them?
I just think that, healthcare in general is something that is lacking in a lot of countries, Trinidad, the United States included, Western countries as well as third world countries. So being able to have this, this alternative that feels accessible and also effective, I think is really important, especially as healthcare becomes even more expensive. And what really fuels me as well is that I know there's a lot of misinformation out there. Plants can be healing and they can also hurt you. So I just want more people to, by putting out this research, I hope that more research will also be done. I don't think we just have to take what our grandmother said as fact or truth. I think we do still need to build upon it and do more research. Recently, I was at a conference, an ethnobotany conference, and there were chemists there were medical doctors, there were nutritionists, there were, there were traditional medicine practitioners. And I think more of those conversations need to happen so that these medicines and these alternatives can start to be standardized and, you know, people can feel safe using them, because I'll be the first to say, like, even though I use these medicines, they do take, you know, you do need to consult practitioners, and you do need to be careful as well. But I don't think that should stop us. But of course, because of the medical industrial complex, a lot of these things aren't studied because they're not able to be patented or able to be packaged in a pretty way, or a profitable way. But I don't think that should stop us. So I wanted to put this research out there so that more and more people can get curious, and especially young people who are in college, who are trying to figure out what to study. I just want more people to be studying and researching these things, not just taking them for granted.
So as your time here as the current sabbatical awardee, Aleya, I'm wondering what your takeaways were. What was the most important influences from your experience here at Oak Spring?
That's a good question. I think, just being on sabbatical, I took away that I had the permission to prioritize my passions. So that was really important for me because, you know, I'm a mother, I'm a business owner. I'm doing a lot of things on a daily basis, but once you give someone a sabbatical, then, you know, you can like prioritize research, you can prioritize being in nature. And I'm taking that into my regular life because it really made me more productive. And as far as the research goes, one of my biggest takeaways was that a lot of these accounts that were there, like, you know, Hans Sloane, Captain Bligh, a lot of the early explorers of the Caribbean who wrote about the plants and learned about how they were used from the indigenous people and Africans. There's a lot to delve into those into those narratives, and I don't think that many people who are actually from the Caribbean or have indigenous blood or African blood often get a chance to read these firsthand accounts. So I just took it as a very it was a privilege to be able to read these firsthand accounts and come up with my own perspectives of what that time looked like and how herbal medicine has stayed the same and changed over time. It's just fascinating that reading this book that's 300 years old, you know, the plants that are in my yard have the same name and the same uses. And, you know, there's a power there to know that our ancestors, you know, were onto something. and I just want to uplift those historical narratives even more.
So what next for Aleya Fraser then? Have you got any projects in mind that you can share with us, and any ideas that germinated whilst you were here at Oak Spring?
Yeah. The land stewardship piece was huge. I love what Bunny and Paul were able to do with that land to have native and rare exotic species and, you know, just be... Humans are, you know, we get credit for destroying nature, but we also can preserve it in beautiful ways. So here in Trinidad, I have a 20-acre estate with my husband, and it's pretty forested, very old growth forest. So after being at Oak Spring, I just got a lot of inspiration for how we can make the land accessible to people, putting signs, making trails, showing where plants are and what those plant uses are. So I wanted to be like a living, breathing, herbarium in a sense, or a botanical museum. Because like I mentioned, these, you know, pulling the history of these plants and bringing them into the future and showing that they're still here. I really want to work more on our piece of land and making it accessible to people, similar to how Oak Spring is accessible to people for research, for relaxation, and for inspiration.
Any books in the pipeline?
Yeah, I mean, well, for now, it's essays. I wrote a few essays while I was at Oak Spring, and I'll be publishing them on my Substack over time. I would love to write another book. I haven't fully settled on what it'll be about, but there will definitely be another book in the future too.
Well, in the meanwhile, Caribbean Herbalism published by Simon & Schuster. It's available at $17.95 from any bookshop and online.
Yep, you can buy it on all major platforms online. A lot of bookstores are selling it in person too, and I always encourage people, if you go to your favorite bookstore and ask them to order it, they will, and that will be, that'll help me out as well.
Wonderful. Well, congratulations again on that publication, and good luck with all your future projects, Aleya, and thank you for taking time to come on this podcast.
Thank you so much, Chris. I had fun talking to you.
And we will now be hopping over to our YouTube channel. So do follow us there, where we'll continue our conversation with Aleya. So for now, here on the podcast, Aleya, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And joining me now is the Oak Spring Programs Director, Danielle Eady. Danielle, welcome back.
Thanks for having me back, Chris.
Well, we love this segment because we get to talk about the programs that are happening here, the events, not beyond the programs. There are so many things that are happening. Each year, it seems to be there are more and more activities, programs, events, but collaborations too. And I know you've got a few things to share with us, but I think this fits neatly between the two guests that we have this month on the podcast for our fall reading list. So you've got some reading to do as well.
Yes, that's true. We're really excited whenever our alumni or current residents have books come out like Aleya and Mariko, and we're developing quite the little library of alumni publications, which is really wonderful to see. But some of the other things that I wanted to share with our listeners were events and things that have been going on. So some people might have seen on social media, there were some beautiful pictures at the Garden Museum in London, where we had a 2-week pop-up exhibit that was featuring wallpapers that were designed by De Gournay, which is a high-end wallpaper company. So De Gournay has been collaborating with us for over a year now to create a collection of 5 beautiful hand-painted wallpapers that were inspired by Mrs. Mellon's library collection. So you can imagine incredibly finely detailed plants, baskets, all things that Mrs. Mellon was really known for loving. So those are a few wallpapers that are available, and we've been really excited about that collaboration. And another project that I wanted to share is a new program that we've just launched that we're soliciting applications for. So we have the Quilters competition, which is, as I said, accepting applications through this fall, and that is for quilters to apply, and a group of them will be selected to come in March, and they will have tours and time to be inspired by our site and resources. And then after they depart, they will work on final proposals to submit to come back, and 2 artists will be selected to create final quilts using some of Mrs. Mellon's fabrics and otherwise showcasing what they found really compelling about our site. And then those quilts will become part of the Oak Spring Library, and the 2 quilters will be paid $5,000 for their final quilts. So we're really excited about that new program. And we would love any help with reaching quilters who would be interested in applying. And that's one area that, like the De Gournay, relates to decorative arts. And we're always really excited to share those opportunities, which was something Mrs. Mellon was so well known for. So those are a couple of things.
Can you please tell everybody how they can apply for this Quilters competition?
Yes. So the Quilters competition is available on our website. They can find the opportunity there, and then they'll fill out an application with a few questions about their quilting style and their interests. And then they'll submit some work samples, images of quilts they've created in the past. So if you go to our website and then you go to our programs tab and then go to 1-day events, you'll find the link to the program there. I won't read out the whole link because it's quite long and, a bit of gobbledygook, but that's where they would find the program to apply to.
Okay, super. And you've got a couple of other things to tell us about.
Yes, I do. So it's an exciting time. September is when we are getting ready for our second annual Rokeby Community Festival, which is a day-long family fun festival. We will have food trucks, we will have external vendors, a small arts and crafts market, and some of our staff will be leading plant walks and tours throughout Rokeby Farm. There will also be a hay bale ride. So lots of fun activities for visitors of all ages. The tickets start only $10. So we're really excited about that event, which is upcoming on Saturday, September 27th. And tickets for that can be purchased on our website as well.
Okay. And there's a ticket button. Is there something on the front page?
Yeah. So again, if you go to our website and then go to programs, 1-day events, it'll be listed there. You can purchase tickets under second annual Rokeby Community Festival.
Okay, super. And you've got an interdisciplinary residency that's just begun.
Yes. So today, actually, September 8th is when we're recording this. And we have another group of 5-week interdisciplinary residents arriving. So this is actually our last 5-week session of the year. After this group departs, we'll have one more alumni group, but this is the last cohort of new folks coming to our site. And we have quite a range of plant scientists, a textile artist, a painter, a photographer, an installation artist, and another humanities researcher. So really showcasing the breadth of what we mean by interdisciplinary residency. And that program, as we said, will run through about mid-October.
Okay. And some other really exciting event that took place this year, which I saw myself, so many more children coming to Oak Spring and enjoying all that we offer here at Oak Spring. And this is a brand new children's garden.
Yeah, so one area that we've grown quite a bit in is in our local education and outreach programming, which primarily serves K through 12 students, but also special audiences and groups of adults as well. And I think Ginger was on the podcast actually a couple months ago. If people want to learn more about those programs from Ginger, who heads that department. So right now we have a new children's garden that's being installed at an existing portion of our biocultural conservation farm, but it will be much more accessible and they'll have some special plantings, mostly showcasing other plants that are grown at the farm, vegetables, natural dye plants, seed-saving plants, but having a space that they can see the plants as an example that's outside of the really production-focused portion of the farm. So we're really excited to see that in construction, and hopefully that will be done sometime this fall.
Are there any other events that we need to mention on the September episode as we head into the fall now? And it certainly is the turn of the fall season here in Upperville.
Yes, those are the things that we are really excited about that are upcoming right now. Of course, we have new things all of the time. In October, we'll have some great events. We'll have an online program with the journal Plant Perspectives on plants, memory, and belonging that will feature some of our alumni of our residency program, talking about how their art and research relates to memory and plants. And then later that month, we will have a screening with the American Conservation Film Festival, featuring some of the shorts from their festival that was in March of 2025. So there's a few things that are coming up in October as well, but we're, of course, getting through September first, and hope everybody will subscribe to the newsletter and check out the website.
And that website, of course, osgf.org, where there are buttons to all of the events that Danielle just mentioned, and to find out more information, also subscribe to the newsletter as well, osgf.org. And we'll put links in the show notes too, Danielle, to all of these things that you've mentioned, so people can follow the direct link in the show notes below the player whilst you're listening to the podcast.
Yes, definitely.
All right, super. Well, thank you so much, Danielle. We'll be back next month with another episode and hear from you what's happening in October here at Oak Spring. So thanks very much, as always, for coming on the podcast, Danielle.
Thank you, Chris. Looking forward to next month.
Our next guest is an interdisciplinary resident alumni, Mariko Thomas. Mariko is the author of a new book, Storying Plant Communications, which she has written with Melissa M. Parks, which will be published on October the 5th of 2025. Mariko, thank you for joining me. Welcome to the Oak Spring podcast.
Thank you so much, Chris. I'm really pleased to be here.
Well, first of all, huge congratulations on the publication or upcoming publication of your book, I should say. So next month, your book is being released. Is that a big sigh of relief for you that it's got to this point after all the work you've put into it?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely relief. A little bit terrifying because when you write something and you're new to the publication process, you don't realize quite how long it takes. And so I wonder if the version of me who had these thoughts like 3 years ago will be like in agreement with the version of me now. But I think that's just part of the issue of something as static as publishing.
Was this your idea originally? I know you have a co-author for this, but was this originally your concept?
Yeah, so we talk about this a little bit in the book. Technically, the book is based on a series of interviews, oral histories, and a bunch of field work I did for my dissertation while living in New Mexico. But we really lean in this book into the concept of a story and how a story is this kind of porous bag of membranes almost. And so I can say that, yes, I came up with this idea. I thought it was really important, but I wasn't having this idea in a vacuum by any means. I was so deeply influenced by my co-author, everyone we met in graduate school, the landscape around us, all the things that we read. And it's really difficult for me to say, yes, this was my idea that happened in singularity. I think of myself as more of a gatherer where I put a bunch of little ideas in a bag. And so maybe the bag was my idea, but not actually the contents, if that makes any sense.
So what is your background then, Mariko, in writing?
So my background in writing is a little bit all over the place. I've done a lot of creative nonfiction writing. I used to do some freelance food writing, and then more academic writing. But I'm really drawn to kind of the nexus between storytelling, people's actual experience, and a little bit more scholarly of a format in writing. And so this book was really lovely in that we were taking people's stories, not cutting them up very much, and their sensorial experiences around plants and in the landscape of New Mexico, and then just kind of matching them up with research with a really light touch.
It sounds like a very interesting career so far. Where did all of this begin? Where did you grow up?
I was born in Portland, Oregon. My parents were international school teachers, and so we moved around quite a bit when I was a young person, which was a definite privilege with also lots of disadvantages. So I was little in South Africa. We came back to the States. I graduated high school in Singapore. I moved back to the States by myself and was a theater major. I realized that I was not quite hardcore enough to stay in theater, but the part of theater that I really loved was not the attention of being on stage. It was seeing these stories come to life. And so at that point, I started studying communication, human communication specifically, with an emphasis on storytelling and narratives and the ways that those connect to our identities. So yeah, I did some graduate school. I moved to Portland and I did a little bit of work there with focus on mostly mixed race identity. And then I moved to New Mexico because I just had this draw to the landscape and I thought, oh, well, maybe I'll just do a doctorate because I feel like I need to be in the desert and I can't really explain it. It turns out you can move somewhere without actually having a reason like a doctorate to move there. But I ended up meeting really incredible people throughout that process, really learning how to be of one place, which I'd never really had before. New Mexico was the longest I'd ever lived anywhere, and how to really fight to be a part of a landscape, because New Mexico is one of those places that you really have to be there. You can't just kind of drop in and drop out and expect to understand what's happening culturally, politically, or even just with the flow of water from a monsoon rainstorm. You have to actually kind of be there every second of it and let the landscape kind of take you over. Which I am one of a legion of people who romanticizes the desert, but it really was such a mind-blowing place. And I learned so much from that desert that I just can't stress enough what an important time of life it was for me. So yes, I was there. I was in an arts collective. I finished my doctorate. I started working on this book. And then eventually I moved to Whidbey Island in Washington. And now I teach at a community college up there. And I still do a lot of side writing.
You mentioned when you were drawn to the landscape. I'm wondering what the catalyst was for that initially.
Yeah, so I think one of the aspects of New Mexico that makes it an incredible draw for artists and ecologists and writers for generations is it's a very extreme landscape. It can be really dry or really wet or really hot or really cold. So there's this aspect of it that it's not very forgiving. And then there's the part of it that is so diverse in the waves of cultures that have tried to establish themselves there over the years, whether it was and is the indigenous peoples on the pueblos and on some of the reservations out there, Spaniards, Mexican influence, very much kind of cowboy Texan culture, and then all of the people who are attracted there for kind of New Age spirituality. It just kind of makes this very extreme mix of people who are attracted to that intensity. And so I think the landscape both attracts and reflects that.
But your subject there in the book, Storying Plant Communications, is very in-depth. So I'm wondering how you got to drill so deep as you did in this subject. What was drawing you deeper and deeper?
Yeah, so when I started getting interested in this, it was because I was doing a lot of research in environmental justice. And formerly, I was specifically interested in the ways that outdoor recreation tends to be unsafe and unwelcoming spaces for people of color, for women, for people who identify as disabled, so on and so forth. And I started to think about whose voices were really present in our environmental discourse. And then I kept following that track back to what if we expanded this idea of who's got a voice even bigger, then whose voices are we also missing? And that's how I arrived at plants. So simultaneously, I was thinking about plants as these organisms that are difficult for humans to have relationships with that aren't just use value relationships because we do not understand their language completely. They have non-centralized nervous systems. There's not a head that we can look at their face and see an expression and be like, this is what you're feeling. It's a whole new approach to languaging plants. So that was one piece. And then the other piece is that my dad was really sick at the time. He had pancreatic cancer and pretty much nothing was working. And so we just started throwing herbs at the situation as well. And I was so surprised and touched and inspired by the ways that people with plant knowledge just kind of came out of the woodwork and offered things for our family, things to help him eat more, things to help his digestion work better, things to help with headaches that were only one step removed from being growing green things in the ground. And there was just a really intense old caretaking power that came with that. And I wanted to understand more about people's relationships and our dependencies on plants, because it was one of the first places it was really illuminated, was in that crisis situation.
So this book obviously is quite diverse from what you've previously been working on and been published in. So how did you decide that this really was worthy of a book, and how to approach it and with the subjects that you chose to cover?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the things, not to be too doomsday, was just impending environmental catastrophe. And again, thinking about this idea of voice and whose perspective is being illuminated when we know we need better solutions for climate crisis, and we need better environmental relations for humans and their more than human counterparts. And so plants seemed like a really important place to start because of this idea, plant blindness, which is now somewhat of a contested term because of its ableist leaning. But Wandersee and Schussler came up with this idea of plant blindness, or the idea that humans tend to only see plants as a backdrop, or only as a use value, or only as a decoration, without really acknowledging the ways that plants keep our planet together, and that we're so deeply intertwined with the lives of plants. And so I think that starting there from a place of a little bit of a panic of, okay, we kind of need all beings on deck, and we need to be acknowledging this as humans and needing to be leaning into more ecocentric relationships. Let's start there. Let's start with the beings that humans tend to frame as unintelligent, unagentive, or unanimate, because we're probably missing something really big there. And we just, as a overall kind of anthropocentric culture, we haven't known what we haven't known yet. And so this is not to say that this foray is the first foray that humans have done, right? And understanding that we need more ecocentric relationships, that plants are agentive, intelligent beings. Traditional indigenous cultures have been saying this for, right, since time immemorial, but there was a real gap in scholarship in higher ed, I think, of acknowledging that we could pull creatures that aren't speaking human languages into these conversations. And what would that do? What would that change? What kind of possibilities might that create? And that felt really important to lean into.
The synopsis of your book reads to explore the narrative accounts of Southwestern herbalists, teachers, farmers, and other plant enthusiasts who maintain deep and reciprocal relationships with the local flora. Can you break that down a little bit in terms of examples for this book? So we want people to buy this book when it gets released in October. Give us a little bit of some sound bites from each of those subjects, if you would, Mariko, and to tempt the reader.
Absolutely. So let me preface this by saying the approach with this book is that we can use social science and storytelling to understand relationships with plants. Ecologists and other scientists have been using volatile chemical signaling, isotope tracing, and all manner of other technologies in order to understand the ways that plants are emitting communication. The focus of this book was looking at people who have lived lives with plants who felt like they were in communicative relationships with plants. So what can we learn about plant communication from people who are actively having these interspecies communication moments? So I interviewed a farmer from the South Valley named Lorenzo, who has since passed away. He was an incredible community member, an advocate for plants, farming, women, so many things. But I would go and talk to him in his hoop houses as he was gardening, and he would explain his history of plants in being raised by his grandmother and the ways that they used plants in his family growing up for every kind of ailment. His connection to the earth in being what he called twice born, which is that he was born at 7 months, and in that era, that was a pretty unsafe time to be born. And so his grandmother had kept him in an Orno, which is an adobe oven. That's pretty common in the Southwest, to keep him warm until he was able to be born again into the world. So he has this really deep innate connection with the landscape around him, with the actual material of the earth. And the way that he transfuses that into his farming is by talking to plants, is by listening to them, is by feeling what he thought about as vibrations with his plants and sending them the right kind of energy, saying that they're going to grow better if you're able to do that. So that's one example. And then I talked to, for example, someone named Dara, who's an herbalist in Albuquerque. And she's really big on the idea that you can let plants be your teachers. And rhetorically, when you shift and give plants an active role like a teacher, right, a role of authority, even just in storytelling, that does something to place plants in a position where people are more likely to try to tune in and reach plants where they're at. So she talks about one plant called Peticularis, and she calls it the Robin Hood of the forest, meaning it takes nutrients from root systems of other plants and it redistributes them through mycelial networks. And she says she's really inspired by this plant and she wants to act like that too. So what kinds of roles in ecology can humans be looking at plants for to also mimic in our own human societies?
Is there anything else that you would like listeners to know about this book, Mariko? Because it is very complex and it's not an inexpensive book. We should warn people that they can find it anywhere online. But it is a very complex book. What else would you like our listeners to know?
Yeah. I think one of my favorite parts of the book is that even though it is a very complex book, we wrote it with the hopes that non-scholars and students would still be able to access these stories. So there are a few chapters that are really dense, and then there's a lot of chapters that are really just, here's an incredible life story of somebody, and here's how this fits in the context of plant communication. And at the end of every chapter, we have something that we call offerings, which are discussion questions that you can talk about with your family or your class or your book club or whatever it is, or activities that are invitations to engage in this in a slightly more practical way. If reading really in depth, right, humanities scholarship is not really your joy, we try to offer different activities like how to make a plant ritual. Should you make a map of your campus or your house where the only landmarks are different plants in order to draw attention to them? We try to offer some different ways of engaging, and that's actually, I think, my favorite part of the book.
I think it was 2023 when you were here at Oak Spring as an interdisciplinary resident. Tell us what you took away from that has helped you with this book.
The Oak Spring Gardens residency was so impactful to me. First, to have the space to work, but probably most importantly, because of the collaborative atmosphere. Plants are at their roots completely collaborative beings. And when we start to think about ecosystems, it's really hard to separate them out. And I think the experience I had at Oak Springs Garden, where it was so encouraged to be working with one another, sharing ideas, building on each other's ideas, and having this really safe and fertile place to work, that was deeply impactful and really important to the success of me getting through this book.
And is there anything else that you would like our listeners to know about the book? As I said, it's coming out on October 5th. So once this podcast is out, they'll be able to pre-book and pre-order the book, will they, on anywhere online? I know it's available at Barnes & Noble. Is there anywhere else that they need to know? And how also they can follow you on social media and your website?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm terrible at social media, but you can follow my artistic practice at submergentcollective.com, where I work with a group of people. I would not expect anybody, honestly, to buy this book, which is probably not what I'm supposed to be saying, but I don't totally agree with the academic publishing model, which I've had a lot more thoughts about since I started this contract. I'll likely be releasing pieces of this book that I'm allowed to that are maybe unedited so that it's more accessible, because I think that's what's the most important, is the sharing of scholarship. So anyone listening to this, I will find ways for you to engage with this book without spending $100 or whatever it is. And I just hope that everyone out there is just continuing to consider the magic of plant relationships and ways that they can have those in their own lives.
Do you use Substack at all for your writings, Mariko?
I don't, but I probably should, huh?
There's another outlet for you, but we'll put links to your website and social media in the show notes, of course. Mariko, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. We really appreciate you taking the time to do this. And we're going to hop over to our YouTube channel, the Oak Spring YouTube channel now, and extend our little conversation for a few minutes there. So I hope you'll join us. But for now on the podcast, thank you so much indeed for your time, Mariko. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Chris. It was a real pleasure.
And if you scroll down the show notes, you'll find links to the topics that were mentioned, the books, of course, and also to the programs here at Oak Spring. Just follow those links to the website and also to our social media. We can be found on Instagram at Oak Spring Garden Foundation, on X at Oak_Spring, and on Facebook at Oak Spring Garden Foundation. Our website again is osgf.org, and that's where you can also subscribe to our newsletter and all the links that were mentioned in this episode. And we can, of course, always be reached via email. That address is program@osgf.org. I'll be back next month with another episode of the Oak Spring podcast. Until then, my thanks again to our guests this month, Aleya Fraser and Mariska Thomas. And if you know anyone who you think might enjoy this show, please do share it with them. And of course, remember to subscribe before you leave your podcast app so you're the first to know when the next episode drops. Until then, thank you for listening.